All rise.
Please be seated.
Now, Mr. Murray, would you like to come forward, please? Please take a seat. Mr. Murray, the purpose of this discussion is to inform you how proceedings are going to proceed today.
Thank you.
I understand that you're unrepresented.
Yes, Commissioner.
But you have had the opportunity and have taken the opportunity to obtain legal advice about today's proceedings?
Yes, Commissioner. Thank you.
Good. Now, as I said, I'll inform you of the process today. First, you will be asked to take an oath or an affirmation. Once you have done that, I will then ask you to identify the statement, which I believe that you have made at our request.
Yes, Commissioner.
And I will ask you to confirm that its contents are true and correct. Once that has been done and you make any changes you want to make to the statement, it will be tendered and become part of the evidence in the Commission. Once that has occurred, Ms Cahill will ask you some questions. When she has concluded her questions, counsel representing other parties in the Commission will be given the opportunity to ask you questions. When they rise to ask you questions, they will identify the party for whom they act. After that has occurred, the Commissioners may ask you some questions. At the conclusion of that process, Ms Cahill, I believe, will be asked whether she has any questions arising, and that will be the process today. During questioning, just want to make it clear to you that if you don't understand a question, you need clarification about it, you can't hear counsel, any of those matters, you just let us know and we will accommodate your desire in that respect. It's important that you give your evidence clearly and in response to questions. So if you don't understand a question, please let us know. Similarly, in respect of documents, if you need to see a document in order to answer a question, then please ask to be able to see that document. We don't want you to guess or speculate about matters, so if you need further information, let us know. In respect of the timing today, we have a morning tea break, we have a lunch break, but if at any other time you need a break, then again, let us know and we will arrange that. Is there anything else you would like to know before we commence?
Thank you, Commissioner.
Right, thank you. Then please stand and state your full name.
Claude Murray.
And would you like to take the oath or the affirmation?
The oath. Oath, thank you.
Then please hold the Bible in your right hand and read out aloud the oath.
I, Claude Murray, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr Murray. Please take your seat. Now, could Mr Murray be shown his statement, which has the number CRW.998.002.0024. Mr Murray, does that appear to be the statement that you've made at the request of the Commission?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Commissioner.
And is there anything in that statement which you would like to alter, change or add at this time?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I would like to correct at paragraph 146B. There is a date there, Commissioner, 24 November 2020. The correct date is 27 October 2020. My apologies, Commissioner.
That amendment will be made. And is there anything else, Mr Murray?
Commissioner, I understand that in respect of 2 annexures, there has been communications to the Commission in regards to non-production order. I believe those annexures are CM4 and CM5. Thank you, Commissioner. Nothing further.
So was the request that there be a non-publication order in respect of those 2?
Yes, my apologies, non-publication order.
Then we will, at least until further order, make a non-publication order in respect of those 2 annexures.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And other than that, is the contents of your statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Then the statement becomes an exhibit in these proceedings. Thank you, Ms Keating.
Thank you, Commissioner Jenkins. Now, Mr Murray, you've been with Crown Perth since 2007, haven't you?
Yes.
And you've been in the role of General Manager, Legal and Compliance for Crown Perth since September 2010.
Yes.
And I understand from paragraph 17 of your witness statement that although you remain in that role currently, it's in effect going to be split into 2 roles, legal on the one hand and compliance on the other, and you'll retain the legal services function but not the compliance function. Is that right? Now, in terms of your reporting lines, do I correctly understand from your witness statement that until his departure from the Crown Group in 2020, you reported to Mr Preston?
Yes.
And had mainly done so up to that point?
Yes.
And you now, after his departure, report to Group General Counsel Ms Ivanov?
Yes.
And that's a Crown Group position located interstate, is it?
Yes.
But you also report to Mr Bossy?
Yes, there is a dotted line to Mr Bossy.
When you're relieved of the compliance function, will you still report to Mr Bossy?
Yes.
And when you reported to Mr Preston, he was obviously located in Perth.
Yes.
And how much time on average did he spend in the Perth office?
Up till his departure.
Yes.
He was, in the 12 months prior to his departure, he would travel to Melbourne weekly and occasionally spend up to a day in the Perth office.
So he was mainly working out of Melbourne?
Yes.
And you say that happened in the last 12 months. Did it go back further than that?
I would say yes, it did. At least 18 months.
Now, how much time does Ms Ivanov presently spend in Perth?
Not any time at the moment due to COVID restrictions.
Right.
She resides in Sydney, my apologies.
So absent COVID restrictions?
That's right.
How often does she come to Perth?
She was employed from June 2021, so there has been an opportunity at this stage for her to travel to Perth. My understanding it is her intention to travel to Perth as soon as the opportunity is available.
And what level of contact do you have with her remotely?
Weekly meetings, one-to-one. We also have a Perth, Melbourne and Sydney legal head meeting. And then there is a weekly meeting.
Thank you.
My apologies. And then there is a wider all of legal teams meeting. And other than that, I'm in communication with Ms Ivanov. I would estimate over the since her engagement, every second or third day.
All right. And that all legal teams meeting, how frequent is that?
I believe it's monthly.
And how much contact do you have with Mr Bossy?
Regular contact.
Yes, how much?
Almost daily.
Right. And what does that, is that casual and incidental contact, or do you have formal meetings every day?
Formal meetings.
Thank you. Now, at paragraph 27 of your witness statement, page 0028, you refer to sitting on a number of Crown Perth committees. Do you sit on any Crown Group committees?
No.
Do all of these Crown Perth committees that you've identified at 27 presently have members on those committees who are not Crown Perth people. They're part of the wider Crown Group people.
The Executive Risk and Compliance Committee has members from the Melbourne property. The Legal Compliance Committee also has members from the Melbourne property. The RG Management Committee also has members from the Melbourne property. The Revocation Third Party Subcommittee does not. The Patron Care Committee does not.
Yes, Environmental Committee.
Sorry, I'm just trying to be efficient, for you. The only at H&I, they have members from Crown Melbourne property.
All right.
So that's the Check and Credit Review Committee and the Internal Sources Management Committee.
Thank you. Now, if we go to the Legal Compliance Committee that you mentioned at 27B, you explain at the back of your witness statement at page 64 where you put in table form the committees and provide some information about them. So if we go to 0064, that you've been a member of this committee since 2008. So that's basically the entire time that you've been at Crown Perth. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're currently the chairperson of this committee.
Yes.
How long have you held that position?
I understand that on or around 2010 through to around 2016, there was a period between around 2016 to December 19 where I was not the chair. From January 2020 to currently, I am the chair.
Who was the chair in that interim period when you were not?
Mr. Paul Hume, Hulme.
Now, you explain in substance in this table at the back of your witness statement that this Legal Compliance Committee, amongst other things, assists senior management to report actual or potential breaches of compliance obligations. Yes. Determine steps to be taken with respect to actual or potential breaches of compliance obligations.
Yes.
And confirms compliance with Crown Group obligations.
Yes.
Now, when you're talking about compliance obligations in this context, that includes compliance with the law, does it?
It includes compliance obligations, which comprises compliance commitments and compliance requirements.
Does it include compliance with the law?
Yes, so compliance commitments are legislative, requirements are more internal policy.
Just go back, compliance with the law, state or federal?
Yes.
Yes. Compliance with the regulator's directions and requirements?
Yes.
And compliance with the internal policies and procedures of Crown Perth and the Crown Group more generally?
Yes.
Thank you. So when you're talking about assisting senior management to do those things, does the primary responsibility for compliance rest with the committee or with senior management?
The primary responsibility, the ownership of each compliance obligation rests with the operational teams. They are responsible for complying with the law. The role of compliance is an oversight function, and it ensures that those operational teams are aware of their responsibilities, and as a second line of defence, the compliance function is to, if you like, be a watchdog in terms of ensuring those operational teams at the ground level are meeting their obligations.
Now, when you talk about operational teams, are these the business units that you describe in your table at page 64?
Yes, and more broadly, every person, every employee, in terms of their performance of their duties, ensuring that they comply with the law.
Well, every person isn't senior management though.
In terms of senior management, it is reporting to senior management as to whether employees are meeting their obligations.
Now, just in looking here at page 64 under the composition of the Legal Compliance Committee, Do I understand here that the compliance officers from each business unit sit on the Legal Compliance Committee?
Yes.
And you set out the different business units in that composition column on this page?
Yes.
And are all of these business units located in Perth?
Yes, they are.
And so does each of these business units have a compliance officer with responsibility for managing and overseeing the compliance obligations within that business unit?
Yes, so every business unit has an annual compliance plan and has a designated compliance officer responsible for being the interface with the department, the business unit, and the compliance committee.
So is there a compliance officer for the cage operations?
Yes, there is.
And who holds that position presently?
That is currently held by Jared, I believe.
Surname?
It escapes me now, sorry.
And who has held the position of compliance officer for the cage operations in the past?
In the past, Anne has also held the position.
Surname? Can't recall.
I can't recall. It's quite a long name. My apologies. I can certainly make it available. Who else has held that position? It's largely been a combination of Jared and in that position.
Now, at the top of that column, where you start listing the business units, you identify AML slash CTF. So there is no AML CTF business unit in Crown Perth currently, is there?
There is a team within Perth, the team financial crime team now, and they sit opposite my offices. They've got a representative, Danielle Slattery, as the current representative from the AML CTF or financial crimes team, and has been for some time part of the committee, I think at least going back to 2008.
Right, so that financial crimes team, how many people are presently
Currently in that team?
in that team?
There are currently, in terms of Perth-based, 4.
And who heads it?
I believe different members of that team report to different persons within the broader financial crime central team.
In Melbourne.
That's correct.
So there's no actual leader here.
I believe that there is a person who takes the lead role. That is Danielle Slattery.
Now, you explain at paragraph 63C of your witness statement at page 0034 that the AML CTF compliance function for the Crown Group, including Crown Perth, is the responsibility of the financial crime and regulatory team. That's a team that's primarily located in Melbourne, is it?
Yes.
And is that actually a management team or is it an oversight committee?
It's a management team.
And who has oversight of that team?
Ultimately, it reports through to the Group Chief Financial Crime Compliance, Mr. Stephen Blackburn. And then within that, there is a Group AML Compliance Officer that reports to Mr. Blackburn. And then the Melbourne and Perth teams report into different people within that structure.
All right, so does that team, the financial crime and regulatory team, before reporting to Mr. Blackburn, is there a committee that it reports into, an oversight committee?
I believe there is an AML CTF committee. I'm not involved or have much knowledge of that committee, if any. To be honest, I don't involve myself in its functions. And the AML CTF or financial crimes team, from a compliance perspective, do act as a specialist compliance function, not dissimilar to health and safety,
Right.
food safety, and a few other teams.
All right, we'll come to that in a moment.
Sure.
But the oversight committee for AML CTF is located in Melbourne, is it?
I can't answer that, sorry.
Or who's on it, whether there are any Crown Perth...
I believe there are Crown Perth
I'll just finish
members.
the question. Whether there's any Crown Perth people sitting on that committee.
Yes, I believe there are Crown Perth persons sitting on that committee.
And do you know who?
I believe the Chief Executive Officer, I believe members from the Perth Financial Crimes team.
Now you say also at 63C that before there was the Financial Crime and Regulatory team, there was the Crown Perth AML/CTF team.
Yes.
And was that a standalone management team?
It comprised Mr. Josh Preston in the role of AML statutory compliance officer, and then originally he had one person reporting through to him directly.
Is that?
It's changed over time. There have been multiple persons.
Think of a few names.
I can. Carolyn Galati, Christo Theodopoulos, Julie Anderson, and Denise van der Klauw. And then over time, I think at some stage, possibly 2016, 2017, there were two persons part of that team through to Mr. Preston.
And was there any involvement by executives or management staff from Melbourne in that AML/CTF team in Crown Perth?
I don't believe so.
I just want to understand now the relationship between the Legal Compliance Committee and the Financial Crime and Regulatory team. You say at 64C on page 0035 that the Financial Crime and Regulatory team reports directly to the ERCC,
Yes.
and that's the ERCC in Perth.
Yes.
And it reports through to the ERCC independently of the Legal Compliance Committee.
Yes. So there are a number of teams that report directly to the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee. That includes the Legal Compliance Committee, the AML or Financial Crimes team as a separate paper that is generated, it's always been generated, I think, from around 2008 as a separate paper to the Compliance Committee. There is also a health and safety update, which is provided through the health and safety function. There is a fraud update. There is a risk update. There is an internal audit report. There is also a responsible service update, which comprises responsible service of gaming and responsible services of alcohol update that's separately reports in to the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee.
All right. Now, you've identified at 64 that a person from the AML/CTF team sits on the Legal Compliance Committee. Is that Danielle Slattery, I think you referred to?
Yes.
Right, so that's a Perth person.
Yes.
And what is the purpose of Danielle Slattery sitting on the Legal Compliance Committee?
The purpose is the committee itself is a credible forum for reporting incidents first and foremost. So it's allows departments to speak up around what incidents have occurred, and there's a requirement to complete a monthly survey, which they're obligated to report incidents. That's reviewed by me on a monthly basis. It's then discussed in that committee, so it's an excellent opportunity for all departments to hear what issues have arisen in terms of compliance incidents, whether they're major or minor. The role of the AML person is to keep informed as to what incidents may be occurring in other departments and other teams that may have relevance to the AML or compliance financial crimes teams functioning. There are, as part of that, updates on policies and procedures. There is also business arising, so we go through actions, close out actions, make sure that if, to the extent that additional training might be required from a financial crimes perspective through to another department compliance team, then that's actioned. We also provide a monthly COVID update, so that has been occurring for the last 12 months monthly. So it allows that compliance officer from AML to buy into other departments and understand what's happening around the business. We don't operate in silos or a vacuum, and it's particularly important that they're at the table and understanding what's happening. They then can go back to their team and disseminate what's the new policy, what's the new procedure. Guys, there's this happening. So that's mainly their function. But as we spoke about, outside of that, they have the direct line to the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee as well.
Does the Legal Compliance Committee have an oversight function at all in relation to the financial crime and regulatory team?
No, it has an annual compliance plan. So every business unit has an annual compliance plan which sets out the business unit's legal obligations, and that is derived from a legal requirements register. So over a decade ago, we formulated a legal requirements register which articulates literally hundreds of laws, compliance requirements and commitments applicable to Crown Perth's operations, and then went through a process of ensuring that accountability for each department was assigned to each compliance obligation. So that forms part of the compliance plan for each of those business units, and then from that compliance activities result from self-assessment questions, licences, reporting, audits, KPOs. That is within their annual compliance plan. All business units are required to have that annual compliance plan, but the more specific oversight, that comes through Mr Blackburn's role and his function specifically. So it's having a high level awareness that they've got the systems and processes in place, and it's not dissimilar to health and safety. Health and safety is a specialist area, so it's not for the, if I can call it, the compliance general function to be responsible for that specific oversight of that specialist area. They're a subject matter expert. Same with food safety. We're passive approved, and that's a specialist area where we've got an independent food safety auditor who's required to give the compliance committee, legal compliance committee, some confidence and comfort that their procedures, plans, certifications are all in place. So,
Thank you. Now, in relation to what you've described as a specialist oversight function for AML/CTF, when did that first begin? When did the Crown Group or Crown Perth first have a specialist oversight of AML/CTF rather than it being overseen by the general compliance?
Understood. From my recollection, as early as 2008, the Executive Risk and Compliance Committee is dynamic. It is continuously looking at, are there particular areas of the business that need...
Early 2008?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Now, Check and Credit Review Committee at 0068 you refer to, you've been a member of that from around 2010 until today.
Yes.
You say the purpose of this committee is to assess outstanding debtors to Crown Perth, including provisioning recovery of debt and relate debts. In the time that you've been on this committee, has part of its responsibilities included considering the extension of credit to international players?
No.
Or the recovery of debts from international players arising from the extension of credit to them by the casino?
Yes.
Have you ever come across in the course of being on that committee an instance where credit has been extended to a domestic patron?
No.
Never been involved or come across a situation where a debt is being recovered from a domestic patron arising from the extension of credit to them by the casino?
No.
Moving to the ERCC, which you refer to at paragraph 27A of your witness statement at page 0028, you describe yourself as the executive officer of that committee. See that there?
Yes.
And we see from 0063 that you've been on the ERCC since 2008, always in the capacity of executive officer, is that right?
No. through the implosion of Crown, Mr. Preston's departure, I think there may have been 1 or 2 meetings where I was required to chair the committee.
Have you, are you also a member of that committee in the sense of having a decision-making responsibility?
Not a decision-making responsibility, and mostly through my role as executive officer, you sit there and you watch and you don't feel that you can participate in it.
Do you contribute to the discussion?
No.
So what's your role then? What's your purpose?
The role and purpose mostly has been to put together the papers. So when, specifically in terms of the legal compliance paper, I produce that and that goes into the pack. I then coordinate the other papers from the other departments, so the AML Financial Crimes team, Health and Safety, Responsible Gaming, they all produce a paper which is then put in a pack, goes to the chair to settle the pack, and then through the committee assisting with the running of the meeting and also taking minutes as part of the meeting.
So is your role purely administrative, or do you provide any comment or analysis on the materials that are provided to the ERCC from other from the business units?
With the legal compliance update, I provide the draft paper through to the chair of the committee.
Apart from that?
Apart from that, I think that's it, yes.
Now, paragraph 14 of your witness statement, page 0026, you refer to Mr. Hume, who held the position of Manager of Gaming and Regulatory Compliance between September 07 and December 2019. You see that there coming up on the screen. You describe him as having the primary interface between Crown Perth and the department. Did he also have the primary interface between Crown Perth and the Chief Casino Officer?
Yes.
Now, there were also operations meetings held monthly between the department and Crown Perth, wasn't there?
Yes.
And from 2010, when you became General Manager Legal and Compliance, you started to attend these meetings, not regularly, but occasionally.
No, it was from November 2007.
I see. But so from the time you joined Crown Perth, effectively from time to time you would attend those meetings?
I would attend all meetings where I was available.
Well, did your attendance become more regular in 2014?
No,
So you basically say you attended all of them from 2007?
where available, yes.
Okay. All right. Now, the purpose of these meetings was for the department to update Crown Perth, wasn't it?
It was a forum to engage with the regulator, give it an opportunity to discuss matters arising, issues, policy, any incidents potentially that were occurring. And more recently, last 12 to 18 months, we also included an agenda item there to ensure the department updated us on any change of policies as a standing agenda item to make sure that we could keep abreast of what the policy changes may be occurring at the department level.
So operational issues were raised and discussed?
Yes.
That's a forum. These meetings are a forum in which to raise and discuss operational issues.
Yes.
And the meetings coincide with the GWC meetings, don't they? They take place shortly after the monthly GWC meeting.
Yes, part of it is to provide feedback from the GWC.
And the Chief Casino Officer typically attends these meetings?
Yes.
And other departmental officers involved in casino regulation,
Yes.
usually at director level.
Yes.
And on the Crown Perth side, it's usual for Mr. Bossy to attend.
Yes.
Mr. Preston, when
Yes.
he was there.
Yes, you was.
You?
Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Sullivan
Yes.
and Mr. Hume.
Yes.
And was it your job in these meetings to provide regular updates about matters of a legal and compliance nature?
Not really. It was random in terms of my involvement. I think in my statement, over the 14-year period, I maybe contributed to 100 agenda items, discussing items. Mr Hume and Mr Preston were around 2,000 items. So I had limited involvement in terms of the operations meetings. I would say that it was usually in respect of liquor licensing. So if we're doing an alteration, redefinition of the site, or any development that may require ministerial approval, or incidental matters that may be like a patron dispute, or those sorts of matters.
So things with a legal orientation.
Yes.
Liquor licensing
Yes.
issues?
Usually liquor, not so much issues with liquor licensing. It was mostly around if we were changing the property boundary, then we would need to seek approval of the department, the director of liquor licensing, and also the Gaming Wagering Commission. So that was the lion's share of liquor discussion in the operations meetings.
Paragraph 114 of your witness statement, page 0047, you refer to fishing trips that you took with Mr Connolly in 2012.
Yes.
You met Mr Connolly in the course of your work at the Perth Casino,
Yes.
and that was at the operations meetings, I presume, that we've just been discussing.
When preparing the statement, I recall Mr Hume introducing myself when I commenced work to a number of department officers. I couldn't recall if it was specifically that introduction or the operations meeting when I first met Mr Connolly.
You were aware that Mr Connolly started back at the department in the earlier part of 2012 as Chief Casino Officer, having previously been at the Department of Fisheries.
I'm not sure if I appreciated his specific role.
Was it in the course of work discussions that you learned that you and he had a shared interest in fishing?
Not necessarily work discussions, it may have just been casual conversations.
But at work?
Yes, sorry.
And presumably at the time that there were operations meetings being held?
I can't recall specifically when and how it came up, sorry.
Mr Connolly invited you to go fishing on his private boat?
Yes.
And how soon did this invitation come after you first met Mr Connolly?
Well, I first met Mr Connolly back in 2007, the records indicate. My understanding, and I've had opportunity to review my emails, correspondence around late 2012 was when I could identify the first invite from Mr Connolly to go fishing with him.
So would you agree then, perhaps several months after he was appointed Chief Casino Officer in 2012?
Yes.
Now, this email, crw.705.0002.2258, from Mr Connolly to Mr Hume, Mr Preston and you, is this the invitation to, this first invitation to a fishing trip that you identify at paragraph 114 of your witness statement?
Yes.
You were aware back then in 2012, weren't you, that Mr Hume was friendly with Mr Connolly from Mr Hume's days working at the Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor?
Yes.
Noting that Mr Preston was also invited, did you understand that he and Mr Connolly were already personal friends?
I don't know if I turned my mind to whether or not they were friends or not. I knew that they had work dealings, and I don't know if at that time what the nature of their relationship was.
And before receiving this email, had you discussed with Mr Connolly verbally the possibility of going fishing on his boat?
I can't recall, sorry.
Or whether you'd had any such discussion during a work meeting?
I can't recall, sorry. It's 10, 12 years ago.
Did you give any consideration at the time of this invitation to whether it was appropriate to accept it?
I can't recall if I gave consideration to it, sorry.
Well, you knew Mr Connolly to be the Chief Casino Officer, didn't you?
I'm not sure if I did recall specifically what his role or function was.
In September 2012?
Yes.
You wouldn't have
I
appreciated...
didn't have any great involvement with Mr. Connolly in terms of a daily operational function. I think I appreciated that he was a senior member of the department. I just did not take notice of it, but more than likely, yes.
Well, more than likely, yes, Mr. Murray.
Yes.
You were going to monthly operation meetings, weren't you?
Yes,
And you were receiving the minutes of those meetings.
yes. I don't know if they mentioned his name as the Chief Casino Officer.
They
in those
certainly
minutes.
mentioned the roles of each person,
Yes,
and he was designated as the Deputy Director General,
yes,
and you understood that he was the Chief Casino Officer, didn't you?
most likely.
You understood him at the very least to have a central role in regulating the casino operations at Perth Casino.
Again, I had little involvement. I didn't. Mr. Hume dealt with him almost exclusively.
You did not have little involvement, did you, Mr. Murray? You went every month to an operations meeting at which Mr. Connolly was
Yes.
typically present.
Yes,
And you understood him to have a central role in
Yes,
regulating
yes.
the licensee,
yes, you're right.
which is why he was at the operations meeting.
Yes, you're right.
That much
Yes.
you understood.
Yes, correct.
You understood that he had a central role in recommending to the GWC whether permissions and approvals should be given to the licensee in respect of its operations.
Yes,
Do you agree it's important in the public interest for the Chief Casino Officer or a senior officer of the regulator to act in his role objectively and without fear or favour?
yes,
Do you agree that if an officer of the casino licensee socialises privately with the Chief Casino Officer, there is a risk that private relationships might affect the casino officer's ability to act in his role objectively and without fear or favour?
yes, there is a risk.
And do you agree that there's at least a perception in the mind of the public that he might not act without fear or favour if there is such a social relationship?
Yes.
Coming back to this email, did you have any concerns about Mr. Connolly referring in the email to his boat that he was to take you out on as the Good Ship Compliance?
I'm not sure. I can't recall, and I'm not sure if it crossed my mind at the time.
Did it occur to you that he might be blurring the lines between a work relationship and his social invitation?
I can't recall at the time. However, my understanding was that the relationship previously, in terms of Mr. Hume's relationship, in terms of it being very open, that there was that relationship, and Mr. Connolly's direct reports having knowledge of it. That's all that I can say in respect of that email. I don't think it just crossed my mind at all.
In any event, you accepted this invitation, did you?
Yes, I did.
Did Mr. Preston accept the invitation?
Yes, he did.
Did Mr. Hume accept the invitation?
I can't confirm that only because I did have opportunity when I was investigated by Crown Resorts in terms of my relationship. I did have an opportunity to review my emails, and I think this specific email, I think there were subsequent emails that showed or confirmed that Mr. Hume didn't attend that
Did not.
trip. Did not.
Now, at 114 little a of your witness statement at page 0047, you refer to 7 weekend fishing trips that you had with Mr. Connolly, Mr. Hume and Mr. John Nichols between 2013 and 2019. Were these trips to either Jurien Bay or Mandurah?
I believe 3 were to Jurien Bay, 1 to Mandurah. There was a separate trip which was just Mr. Connolly and didn't include Mr. Hume or Mr. Nichols, which was to Mackerel Islands. There was also a trip to, possibly 2 trips to Rottnest Island. The details are in the Macpherson-Kelly report, where it articulates the trips in detail. So I'm happy to go to that if that assists the Commission.
What was the longest time that a fishing trip occupied?
Either between 2 to 3 days. Nights, sorry.
2 to 3 nights.
Yes.
Now, page 47, I think we're still on at paragraph 119. You say there that during the fishing trips and also the lobster fishing in the metro area that you also speak of, in addition to the fishing trips, you didn't engage in any work-related conversations to ensure a separation between work and our relationship. Then you go on to explain that a little further at page 0048 at paragraph 121. You say, for my part, we consciously decided not to discuss work-related matters while fishing. Who's the we that you're referring to there?
Well, not express. There was an understanding. The consciously, I think that was between Mr. Hume and myself.
So you discussed it with Mr. Hume,
Yeah, absolutely.
that you weren't going to discuss work-related matters on fishing trips?
Absolutely.
And is your evidence that it wasn't expressly discussed with Mr. Connolly, but there was in your view, a tacit understanding that you weren't going to discuss work-related matters on fishing trips?
It was never discussed with Mr. Connolly. Right from the beginning, we did not discuss work-related matters.
You explain that conscious decision not to discuss work-related matters. You say at little a, it would not be appropriate. Why do you say it wouldn't be appropriate?
From my perspective, and we're talking about conflict, it's about identifying conflict and managing the conflict. What was important to us and why it was appropriate is blurring lines. So it was particularly obvious that you weren't to mix the two, and ensuring that work is a separate thing, and through work you respect the role and the function. When you're fishing, you needed to ensure that there was a clear line.
Well, what was the clear line in your mind?
Well, the clear line in my mind was, on one hand, having enjoyment through fishing, and then talking about work. It would just be wrong, and we just would never do that.
Why would it be wrong?
Well, you're blurring the lines, in my view.
And what's the problem with blurring the lines?
Well, I just don't think that it's acceptable, because you're mixing the pleasure with the work. And when you're discussing work, you need to be in an office, you need to be meeting a person with your suit on. Just common sense says that you just don't do that sort of thing.
So you're careful to keep the work relationship out of the social occasions. That's the effect of your evidence.
Yes.
But it didn't work the other way around, did it? Because you brought the social relationship into the work realm.
I think in respect of bringing into the work realm, emails, or if there was discussion, that there was a clear separation. There wasn't a mixture in terms of, I would email Mr. Connolly, can you review a document or a submission? Oh, and by the way, how's the fishing going to go on the weekend? I'm highly confident, and I've been through every email. There is no email in which the two are mixed. It's very deliberate in terms of, if you're discussing work matters, there should be no mention of what's happening on the weekend and can we go fishing and that sort of thing. So, notwithstanding, yes, there was communication and it was informal banter. I think it was light-hearted. It was centred around fishing, and that is consistent. And it was always separated. There was no mixing in terms of
Now,
those
there's social
communications.
interactions at work, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
Yeah. By 2014, you're exchanging emails through your work email addresses about boats and fishing trips.
Yes.
And you accept that the tone of these emails was very familiar.
Yes.
Mr. Preston, Mr. Hume and Mr. John Nichols were typically involved in these email exchanges as well.
Yes.
And Mr. Connolly in particular, but also Mr. Hume, would engage in a lot of what you would describe as banter.
Most of the emails were initiated by Mr. Connolly. There was I would say, guessing 1 in 10 were responded to by Mr. Nichols, Mr. Hume, Mr. Preston, or myself. And yes, there
Come
was
back to
banter.
my question, please. What I'm asking you about is the nature of the emails.
Yes,
And Mr. Connolly in particular, but also Mr. Hume, would engage in a lot of banter, wouldn't they?
yes.
Which would fairly be described as blokey.
I don't know what's described as blokey.
Well,
It
let me
wasn't
help you. I'll help you.
Yes, sure.
The typical theme of these emails was to accuse one or more of the group of being unmanly and henpecked by their wives, wasn't it?
I think there may have been 1 or 2 emails, but there were a lot of emails in there that were not of that nature at all. I think there were emails just describing votes from Mr. Connolly. I don't think there was anything offensive in those emails. I don't think there was anything inappropriate. There was no mentioning of issues with work colleagues or anything like that. It was, again, very much centred around fishing.
CRW.709.132.1836 is an email dated the 13th of March 2014. We start at the beginning at 1837. Mr. Connolly at 12:35 p.m. In the second paragraph, explaining how he gets to wear pants in his house and has requested and received permission for a sleepover in Jurien Bay. What's the story with the rest of you? Can I send a note home in your school bag if you like? And then he's got the Deputy Director General footer at the bottom of the email. Now that's a fairly typical flavour of the email communications from Mr. Connolly.
Yes,
And if we go to 1836 and we see Mr. Hume's response, he doesn't need to seek permission. I think he means unlike other soft or henpecked males in the group.
sorry, can I go down a bit? Oh, yes, sorry, now I've got it. Yes, sorry, I was looking up. Yes,
So I think he means to say unlike other soft or henpecked males in the group, and then goes on to say, I have not heard from the other girls. Have you built up the courage to request time away? You understood that to be a reference to the other members of the group.
yes,
And then your response comes above that. Sorry, I'll just... sorry, if we can just go back to page 1837. And we can see that his gaming and, up the top please, gaming and regulatory compliance manager footer comes at the
Yes.
end of that email. And you played along with this style of communication, didn't you?
yes, I did.
Yes. And if we go to 1836, is this your normal style of communication with your male friends, Mr. Murray?
Not really, no.
So you were conforming to the tone of the email
I think
set
so.
by
I think
Mr. Connolly and Mr. Hume, is that right?
I think that's right.
Yeah. And so you respond in the middle of page 1836. You've been out fishing all week while your wife looks after the kids and mows the lawn. That was your way of fitting into the theme of the and tone of the emails, was it?
Yes,
And then you go on to explain that you don't need permission, but you ask if Mr. Hume's mummy knows he's going.
yes,
Again, trying to fit in.
yes,
And you sign off as Cheers Gilly. See that there?
yes,
Because it was a joke, if you will, between you and Mr. Connolly that you had each adopted the persona of one of the characters from the old TV series Gilligan's Island. Is that right?
possibly, I can't recall.
So
Yes, I'll
you
accept
called
what
him
you're
the
saying.
skipper and
Yes,
he called you Gilligan.
yes,
And this was around the time, and at this time you were still going to your monthly operations meetings,
yes,
and the familiarity and banter in these work email exchanges continued on through the years after this, didn't it?
yes,
We go to CRW 709-132-6194, which is an email from Mr Connolly to you and Mr Hume of the 1st of March 2017. Mr Connolly is there planning another trip for the 24th of March, or some fishing expedition. Has everyone got their permission slips in order, or are we postponing until gender reassignment is complete? This is this blokey banter.
Yes.
You'd agree? And you respond in kind, Paul's, that's Mr Hume's, was completed some time ago, Mick. You see that?
Yes.
And what you're conveying is it's only males, real men, who can go out on this trip. Jokingly, but that's
Yes,
the
jokingly.
point you're trying to make.
Yes.
Do you agree that it's important for officers of the licensee and officers of the regulator to conduct their relationship with an appropriate degree of formality and professionalism?
In work-related matters, yes.
It's important, isn't it, for that to occur in order for the regulator to maintain objectivity and impartiality when dealing with the licensee,
Yes.
and to maintain for the public a perception of objectivity and impartiality?
Yes.
And you'd agree that these emails fall well short of that standard of formality and professionalism appropriate to a licensee-regulator relationship?
I think the emails in the context, which was a friendship, which was open and declared, is not uncommon. I accept, looking back, and particularly given the personal nightmare that I've now gone through, and still suffering, that the behaviour may have been somewhat unfitting. I believe that if you viewed every one of my emails to Mr Connolly in respect of work-related matters, and there are a few, only a few rather, the conduct and the respect for the position, and even as recently as 6 months ago, speaking to another person within our business, I'd made a point, make sure you email that to Mr Connolly, because not just to Mick. So I was very mindful that with work-related matters, that respect that the role commands and the need for professionalism was maintained when dealing with him on work-related matters. That's all I can say on it.
You and Mr Connolly and Mr Preston and Mr Hume also exchanged emails, didn't you, during work hours about boats that were advertised for sale?
Yes.
And we have an example here, CRW.709.132.3456. An email from Mr Connolly to the three of you, 16 January 2015. And that was not necessarily a frequent, but certainly from time to time, these links to boats being advertised for sale would be circulated amongst the group.
Yes, I'd agree with that. It mostly, if not exclusively, initiated by Mr Connolly. Yes, there was a period, possibly 2014 to 2016, where there was a spate, if you like, where Mr Connolly would randomly send boats for sale. I would respond, I think, as I said, maybe to one in 10 of them.
CRW.709.132.2391 is an email exchange in March 2014. And if we have a look at page 2391, there's been some talk about pulling lobster pots, and Mr Connolly says in the middle of this page, taking a leaf out of the Crown book, I will catch, measure and clip the crays and put them back in the pots so you guys think you caught them. What did you understand him to be saying to you there?
So that was in reference to an understanding that I had gleaned from one of the teams that would take patrons out on a boat. They would have a purchased crayfish and they'll put it in the pot, in the crayfish lobster pot, and then take the patron out, pull it up, and then say to the patron, we've caught a crayfish.
That's something you had told Mr. Connolly?
I was actually more interested from a legality perspective because of what was actually going. He had worked at fisheries, so I was actually interested in, because there's quite a regime around what you can and cannot do in catching crayfish.
Did you ask him inside work or outside work?
I can't recall when I asked him, sorry.
Now, just above this, Mr. Connolly is offering vouchers for skydiving to the group. You see that?
Yes.
And you say above that you can't go, but you suggest that Mr. Preston and Mr. Hume take the vouchers. Do you know if they did?
I don't know, sorry.
And
except I do understand that Mr. Hume has skydived once. I've never skydived, and I'm not aware of Mr. Preston ever, but I do know that Mr. Hume has skydived.
And in the response that you give, you mention in the first 2 lines that you owe Mr. Connolly a bottle of wine. See that?
Yes.
What for?
I can't recall. It's 7 years ago. I suspect he may have purchased a bottle of wine and it was just simply to own the purchase of that wine, but I'm guessing.
And even when you're exchanging emails such as this, did
Yes.
it not occur to you that it was inappropriate to have this personal relationship with an important person within the regulator alongside the business relationship between Crown and GWC?
In terms of my role and my capacity, no, I didn't. I had a friendship and it was centred around fishing. I kept, I think in terms of managing it, appropriate in ensuring that emails and conversations were separate from work-related matters, and I always had some comfort that it was very open, and the Gaming Wagering Commission and the chairman of the Gaming Wagering Commission was aware of this relationship.
So Mr. Hume was an integral member of this group as well.
Yes.
You're a lawyer, did you have any concerns about Mr. Hume's involvement?
Absolutely not. I can't stress it enough in terms of perception. I understand that. In terms of actual, I believe Mr. Hume is one of the highest in terms of integrity and professionalism, and I had no concerns. And any discussions that we had together at all times, I did not see a person can have a friendship. A friendship is how it's managed and how people conduct themselves. And yes, looking back again, given this experience, and it's been horrible. I've had media chasing me. Definitely not do it again. But it's been. I didn't appreciate it at the time.
Now, you mentioned just then, and you've mentioned a couple of times during the course of your evidence, that this relationship was disclosed within Crown Group, and you understood it to have been disclosed to Mr. Sargent.
Yeah. Yes.
So, why did that make the difference to you?
Particularly in terms of the disclosure of Mr. Sargent, an awareness of it would allow him to take what steps he may have needed to, including appreciating Mr. Connolly's involvement, including Mr. Connolly's professionalism, including the work that Mr. Connolly's delivering to Mr. Sargent and the Commission, I think that's where I had comfort that Mr. Sargent was aware of it and was very open. This was not concealed or people trying to hide things, but having that awareness certainly gave me confidence that Mr. Sargent was in a position to manage it as he saw fit.
Now, you mentioned in relation to the purchase of Mr. Connolly's boat in October 2015, this is at paragraph 137.0051, that you were proactive in getting written approval for the purchase of the boat, and you considered that approval should be obtained from the head of the department or GWC as well. You recall that evidence?
Yes.
Now, why did you consider it important to get a written approval there in relation to the purchase of the boat, but not in relation to the continuation of the personal relationship?
From my perspective, it was a commercial transaction involving cash, sale of an asset. My instinct told me that I should raise it with my line manager, and I think I'm happy to take the Commission to that email. My email to Mr. Preston recommended that we obtain approval from Barry Sargent in terms of the proposed purchase of the boat. Mr. Preston agreed, and subsequently that was communicated to Mr. Connolly that approval be obtained.
Now, I think you agreed with me a moment ago that Mr. Preston was typically included in all of these bantering email exchanges, or almost all of them, that occurred over the years, yes?
I think particularly the earlier years, I can't be accurate in terms of, from 2017, I think it largely died down in terms of all the boat sale type emails. I know that in 2012 when Mr. Preston went on, which I understand to be the only half-day trip, subsequently he consciously said he won't be attending any other trips because of his seniority.
So he actually had a conversation with you
Yes.
about that? And what was that conversation?
Well, the nature of that conversation was we were letting him know that we were going to go fishing again, and his view was shouldn't go fishing because of, spending a weekend as a senior executive would not be right.
Do you
So I'm
Sorry,
middle management,
just-
sorry.
ask my question? Do you think that Mr. Connolly was aware of Mr. Preston having made that conscious decision?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, no. There was nothing that I could recall.
Did he not continue to invite Mr. Preston out on fishing trips?
He may have done, but that was more than likely Mr. Preston being polite and ultimately not going fishing.
And Mr. Preston continued to engage, though, in the email exchanges, not as much as you, but to an extent.
He did, and in being friendly and polite and engaging, I can only assume.
Have a look at the friendly and polite at crw.709.132.3200. And talking about not sure if this goes over to the next page. Yes. So this is an example of situations in which Mr. Connolly, he did this from time to time, didn't he? You'd go out on a trip, a fishing trip, and he would make a YouTube video. He'd make a video of the trip and then upload it to YouTube. Is that right?
Yes, of the actual fishing on the boat, yes.
And so he does that, and then Mr. Preston responds 7 January 2015, describing the video as brilliant, and then goes on to speculate, you see there, about Mr. Hume's role.
Yes,
That was the kind of banter that Mr. Preston engaged in after he decided it wasn't appropriate for him to go on the fishing trips.
Yes.
Is that right?
yes, that's right.
And I take it, therefore, that Mr. Preston never once suggested to you that your form of communication that you were having with Mr. Connolly or your socialising with him outside of work was inappropriate or should cease?
That was never communicated to me.
And you're not aware of Mr. Preston ever suggesting to Mr. Hume that his communications with or socialising with Mr. Connolly outside of work was inappropriate or should cease?
No.
Did you deliberately cultivate your relationship with Mr. Connolly because you thought it would be helpful to Crown Perth in its management of the Perth Casino licence?
Absolutely not.
Did you have any discussions with either Mr. Hume or Mr. Preston about possible benefits to Crown Perth in its management of the Perth Casino licence if you and Mr. Hume and Mr. Preston developed a good personal relationship with Mr. Connolly?
100% not.
Just returning to paragraph 16, page 26 of your witness statement. Having identified that Mr. Hume was the primary interface with the department until December 19, you say after he departed, a Ms. Grist replaced him.
Yes.
However, from that time, the role, do you mean Mr. Hume's former role, was mostly shared between you, Denise van der Klauw and Ms. Grist?
Yes.
Did you become involved in aspects of Mr. Hume's former role because of your personal relationship with Mr. Connolly?
No.
You've referenced, I think, at paragraph 138, page 0051 to 0052 of your witness statement, various codes of conduct that Crown Perth had, which presumably were modified over the time that you have been with Crown Perth. Yes?
Yes.
Now, over the time of your friendship with Mr. Connolly, have you ever given any thought to whether the relationship that you have with him and the communications and conduct between you in that regard falls foul of any of the directions and guidance in those codes?
I did not, and I subsequently understand through the investigation by Crown Resorts, which was the external investigation, 3-month investigation, they considered each of these policies except for the anti-bribery and corruption policy, possibly, that they did not consider there to be a breach of those policies.
Thank you. Mr. Murray, we break usually for about 15 minutes, so we'll come back at 11:30.
All rise.
advised.
Please be seated. Thank you, Mr Murray. Ms Cahill.
Thank you, Commissioner Owen. Now, in March 2014, Mr Murray, there was a meeting of the operations, department operations team that we discussed before the break. I'll turn up the minutes at dlg.004.001.0236. You were actually an apology at this meeting for the 27th of March, but you would have read the minutes afterward.
I can't recall if
Was
I
it your
would have.
practice to do that?
If I was confirming the minutes, if I was an attendee, of course. I can't recall if I did review these minutes, so I apologise.
Let me take you to item 4.1 at page _0002.